June 1940. The Nazi war machine crushes the French Third Republic in just 6 weeks. Across the English Channel, 338,000 trapped Allied soldiers await complete annihilation on the beaches of Dunkirk. Between May 26 and June 4, 1940, Operation Dynamo triggers the largest naval evacuation in history. A makeshift armada of 860 civilian vessels rescues the British Expeditionary Force from total destruction. On June 18, 1940, Prime Minister Winston Churchill addresses a terrified nation. The Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. The island fortress stands entirely alone. July 16, 1940. Inside the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, a confident Adolf Hitler issues Directive No. 16. The Führer orders the preparation of Operation Sea Lion, the amphibious invasion of Great Britain. To cross the narrow 34-kilometer English Channel, the German army requires 2,000 transport barges. But Hitler knows any seaborne invasion guarantees catastrophic casualties unless Germany achieves absolute air superiority first. Luftwaffe Commander-in-Chief Hermann Göring makes a bold promise. His Air Force will obliterate the Royal Air Force in just 4 weeks. Göring commands the most experienced, combat-tested aerial armada on Earth. By August 1940, the Luftwaffe unleashes a terrifying arsenal. Göring marshals 2,600 operational combat aircraft, including 1,000 deadly Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters and massive fleets of Heinkel He-111 twin-engine bombers. Facing this juggernaut is RAF Fighter Command, led by Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding. Britain can muster only 1,200 fighter planes, primarily Hawker Hurricanes and the iconic Supermarine Spitfires. They are outnumbered 2-1. Yet the air war is only half the existential threat. In 1940, Great Britain imports 70% of its food and raw materials. That requires 50 million tons of maritime cargo annually to survive. Beneath the Atlantic waves, German Admiral Karl Dönitz aims to starve the island. Though starting the war with only 57 U-boats, Dönitz realizes that severing Britain's oceanic lifelines will force an unconditional surrender. From June to October 1940, German submariners experience what they call the happy time. Operating from newly captured French ports, U-boats sink 270 Allied merchant ships, sending 1.5 million tons of precious cargo to the ocean floor. Thus, the survival of the British Empire hinges on a brutal, two-dimensional war of attrition. Fighter pilots must maintain an unbreakable shield in the sky, while merchant sailors defend the vital oceanic lifeline. The opening phase, known as the Kanalkampf, or Channel Battles, begins in July 1940. The Luftwaffe strategically targets British coastal shipping convoys, testing the response times of Dowding's fighter squadrons. But Great Britain possesses a revolutionary technological trump card. Scottish physicist Robert Watson Watt had weaponized radio waves. By summer 1940, 21 massive chain-home radar towers stand watch along the British coastline. These 100-meter-tall steel monoliths can detect incoming Luftwaffe bomber formations from 160 kilometers away. The element of surprise is entirely eliminated, allowing Dowding to scramble his limited fighters with deadly mathematical precision. Radar is only the first step. The true genius lies in the Dowding system. Raw data from coastal radars flows directly into the highly classified filter room at RAF Bletchley Priory. Here, Women's Auxiliary Air Force operators translate radar pings into physical markers. Using wooden tools, they plot the exact altitude, speed, and heading of incoming German raids on the massive map. This filtered intelligence is rapidly relayed to sector stations. Within 2 minutes of a radar ping, RAF fighter squadrons are alerted. Dowding has eliminated the fog of war, creating a perfectly synchronized shield. Crucially, Dowding refuses to commit all his squadrons at once. By knowing exactly where the Germans are, he deploys just enough fighters to intercept, strictly preserving a vital strategic reserve. August 13, 1940. Codenamed Adlertag, or Eagle Day. Goering orders a massive coordinated assault to permanently blind the RAF, targeting radar stations and coastal airfields with 1,400 sorties. Heavily armed Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters escort dense boxes of Dornier and Heinkel bombers across the Channel. Their objective? Lure the RAF out and crush them in a decisive aerial battle. But the RAF is not caught on the ground. Warned by the Dowding system, British squadrons wait until the last possible moment before scrambling into the summer sky to intercept. Climbing into the sun, 22-year-old RAF pilots endure crushing G-forces. They rely on the rugged Hawker Hurricane and the legendary Agile Spitfire to shatter the German formations. German pilots are violently shocked. Instead of achieving surprise, they fly straight into perfectly positioned ambushes. The Luftwaffe realizes the British possess a terrifying operational awareness they simply cannot comprehend. A strict tactical doctrine is applied. Hawker Hurricanes, with concentrated firepower, dive through the fighter screen to shred the heavy bombers. Meanwhile, the faster Spitfires duel the deadly Bf-109s higher up. Furthermore, the Luftwaffe faces a fatal geographic flaw. The Bf-109 has severely limited operational range. Over London, German pilots have a mere 10 minutes of combat fuel before they must retreat. August 15, the greatest day. Goering launches his largest coordinated offensive, attacking from France, Denmark, and Norway simultaneously. Absolutely convinced the British fighter reserves are completely exhausted and broken. But Dowding's meticulously preserved reserves meet them at every turn. In a single day of unprecedented carnage, Goering loses 75 aircraft. The unescorted bomber fleets flying from Norway are mercilessly slaughtered. Behind the lines, Britain is winning the hidden production war. Spearheaded by Lord Beaverbrook, British factories ruthlessly churn out 470 new fighters a month, more than double Germany's manufacturing output. Furthermore, a downed German pilot on British soil is immediately captured as a prisoner of war. But a downed British pilot parachutes into friendly territory, returning to the cockpit within hours to fight again. Late August 1940. A lost German bomber accidentally drops its payload on London. In swift retaliation, Prime Minister Churchill orders a daring night raid directly on Berlin. Adolf Hitler is absolutely enraged. In a furious speech, he alters Luftwaffe strategy. Instead of systematically destroying RAF fighter bases, he orders the total annihilation of London. This emotional, irrational decision is the crucial turning point of the war. Massive German bomber formations shift their crosshairs entirely away from Dowding's critically crippled airfields. September 7, 1940. The Blitz begins. For 57 consecutive nights, London is subjected to relentless, terrifying aerial bombardment by the German Luftwaffe. Families are forced underground into crowded subway stations. Civilians navigate mountains of smoking rubble. The terror campaign is explicitly designed to shatter British morale and force capitulation. The physical toll is absolutely catastrophic. High explosive and incendiary bombs ignite massive firestorms, turning the historic capital of the British Empire into a literal inferno. By the end of the campaign, over 40,000 British civilians will be killed. Yet, the psychological effect is the exact opposite of what Hitler intended. The people's resolve hardens. More importantly, while London burns, the RAF is given the precious breathing room it desperately needs. Cratering airfields are rapidly repaired, and the integrated Dowding system comes fully back online. September 15, 1940. Now known as Battle of Britain Day. Believing the RAF is completely annihilated, Goering launches a colossal daylight assault to finish the job. Massive waves of Dornier and Heinkel bombers drone toward the capital in tight box formations, fully expecting empty skies. But Dowding's resurrected fighter command is waiting. Thanks to the intact radar network, Every single available Spitfire and Hurricane is scrambled by Air Vice Marshal Keith Park. There is no reserve left. This is the decisive clash. Over the skies of London, an apocalyptic dogfight ensues. The rigid Luftwaffe formations are brutally torn apart by swarms of British fighters striking from every angle. The Germans lose 60 aircraft in a single day. The Luftwaffe hierarchy is utterly stunned. The British air shield remains absolutely impenetrable, shattering the myth of German invincibility. Facing unacceptable losses and unable to secure the sky, an infuriated Adolf Hitler quietly postpones Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. The amphibious invasion of Great Britain is cancelled. Churchill immortalizes the RAF pilots. Never was so much owed by so many to so few. But as the skies clear, a far darker threat rises from the freezing Atlantic Ocean. Winston Churchill later confessed, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." The survival of Britain depended entirely on the Atlantic. Without the sea, the island starves. Britain requires 1 million tons of imported food and materials every single week. If the supply chains are severed, capitulation is mathematically inevitable. Admiral Karl Dönitz cares nothing for glorious naval battles. His strategy is entirely mathematical. The tonnage war. Sink more Allied merchant shipping than the shipyards could possibly build. His primary weapon is the Type 7 U-boat, small, cramped, but brutally effective. It carries 14 lethal torpedoes and a deck gun, designed explicitly to hunt on the surface at night. Inside, 50 men share a claustrophobic steel tube that smells of diesel, sweat, and mold. Conditions are horrific, but these crews are elite, fanatically loyal, and ruthlessly efficient. To protect the supply lines, the Allies used the convoy system. Dozens of slow merchant ships huddled together in massive rectangles, guarded by a ring of Royal Navy destroyers and corvettes. But the Atlantic is impossibly vast. To find them, Dönitz deploys the Rudeltaktik, or wolf pack. U-boats spread out into a massive patrol line, hundreds of miles long, across the shipping lanes. When a single U-boat spots the smoke of a convoy, it does not attack. Instead, it shadows the ships, staying just over the horizon, and radios the exact coordinates to headquarters. Dönitz orchestrates the kill. He orders all available U-boats in the sector to converge on that signal. In the pitch black of night, the Wolfpack finally strikes. By attacking on the surface under cover of darkness, the U-boats render British ASDIC sonar completely useless. They slip past the destroyers and fire a devastating spread of torpedoes point blank. For the merchant sailors, it is an absolute nightmare. When a tanker takes a hit, it becomes an erupting volcano. Men are thrown into freezing water, covered in burning oil, with no hope of rescue. Royal Navy escort commanders are paralyzed. Standing orders prohibit stopping to pick up survivors, as a stationary ship is an easy target. They are virtually blind against surface attacks in the dark. The carnage is concentrated in the Mid-Atlantic Gap, a vast 300-mile stretch of ocean completely out of range of Allied patrol aircraft. It earns a grim nickname, the Black Pit. Between June 1940 and February 1941, U-boat crews celebrate what they call the Happy Time. In just 8 months, they slaughter 348 ships, sending a staggering 1.7 million tons to the bottom. Churchill's nightmare is becoming reality. Dönitz is winning the mathematical war. If the British cannot figure out how to counter the Wolfpacks, the Empire will starve, and Hitler will conquer Europe without setting foot on English soil. To defeat the Wolfpack, Britain cannot rely on brute force. They must use intelligence. The front line shifts from the freezing Atlantic to a quiet, top-secret estate in Buckinghamshire, Bletchley Park. Here, a brilliant 28-year-old mathematician named Alan Turing leads a team of eccentric codebreakers. Their seemingly impossible mission? Crack the German naval Enigma code. The Enigma machine is an electromechanical marvel. By using interchangeable rotors and a complex plug board, it scrambles every letter of a German radio message into complete gibberish. The German military resets the machine settings every single midnight. This generates exactly 159 quintillion possible combinations every 24 hours. Cracking it by hand is mathematically impossible. Turing realizes that only a machine can defeat another machine. He designs the bomb, a massive electromechanical computer that simulates 36 Enigma machines running simultaneously at lightning speed. By mid-1941, Bletchley Park regularly intercepts and decodes Dönitz's orders. This ultra-intelligence allows British admirals to simply reroute their vulnerable convoys around the waiting wolf packs entirely. The tide seems to turn, but the war abruptly goes global. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. The sleeping giant awakens, and the United States officially enters the conflict. Under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, America pledges its immense industrial might to the Allied cause. But physically, the U.S. Navy is completely unprepared for an anti-submarine war. Dönitz seizes the opportunity, launching Operation Drumbeat. German U-boats cross the Atlantic to find the American East Coast completely unblacked out. Cities like New York and Miami blaze with light. For U-boat commanders, it is a turkey shoot. American merchant ships sail independently, not in convoys, and are perfectly silhouetted against the bright neon lights of the coastal cities. This leads to the second happy time. In early 1942, just a handful of U-boats massacre 397 ships off the American coast. Over 2 million tons of cargo go down in sight of civilians on the beaches. To make matters worse, Dönitz changes the locks. In February 1942, the Kriegsmarine introduces the M4 Enigma, adding a fourth rotor. Bletchley Park is instantly blinded. The intelligence blackout lasts for 10 grueling months. But the mathematical equation changes. American shipyards mobilize on an unprecedented scale. Using prefabricated parts, Henry Kaiser's factories begin launching standardized Liberty ships. Production speed reaches the absurd. A full 10,000-ton cargo ship is built in just 42 days. For the first time, Dönitz's equation fails. The Allies are building ships faster than the U-boats can sink them. By late 1942, Turing's team cracks the four-rotor Enigma. Intelligence is restored. With American industry pumping out ships and escorts, the stage is set for 1943, the decisive, bloody climax of the Atlantic War. Spring 1943. The Battle of the Atlantic reaches its absolute bloody climax. In March, colossal wolf packs engage massive Allied convoys in the largest continuous naval battles in human history. But the Allies unleash a wave of game-changing technology. Specially modified B-24 Liberator bombers with very long-range fuel tanks finally close the mid-Atlantic gap. The Black Pit is illuminated. Even more devastating is the Type 271 centimetric radar. Small enough to fit on escort ships, its short wavelengths are so precise they can detect a submarine periscope poking through the waves. Nighttime surface attacks become suicidal. Allied patrol planes equipped with massive Lee light searchlights dive out of the pitch-black sky, suddenly turning night into day for the terrifyingly exposed U-boats. Beneath the waves, destroyers employ a lethal new weapon, the Hedgehog. Instead of blindly dropping depth charges off the back, this mortar system fires a spread of 24 bombs directly ahead of the ship. Crucially, Hedgehog bombs only detonate upon physical contact. There is no warning explosion. For a U-boat crew, the first sign of an attack is often the catastrophic explosion that tears their hull apart. For the hunters, the ocean turns into an inescapable steel tomb. Being a German submariner becomes the most dangerous profession in the entire war, with an appalling 75% fatality rate. All of these Allied advantages culminate in May 1943. Known to the Kriegsmarine as Black May, the hunters are systematically tracked down and slaughtered without mercy. In a single month, Germany loses an astonishing 43 U-boats. That represents roughly 25% of Dönitz's entire operational fleet destroyed in merely 4 weeks. The rate of loss is catastrophic. Admiral Dönitz is forced to confront the harsh mathematical reality. His invincible wolf packs have been thoroughly outsmarted, outproduced, and outfought by the combined industrial and scientific might of the Allies. On May 24, 1943, recognizing that the battle is definitively lost, Dönitz issues the bitter order. He pulls his surviving U-boats out of the North Atlantic entirely, retreating to the Bay of Biscay. The oceanic lifeline is finally secured. Massive Allied convoys, packed with millions of tons of food, fuel, and weaponry, stream across the Atlantic, completely unmolested by the German Navy. In London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill finally breathes a sigh of relief. The terrifying grip on Britain's throat has been broken. The island fortress is safe from starvation. With the shipping lanes open, an unprecedented logistical miracle begins. Millions of American soldiers, thousands of Sherman tanks, and endless mountains of supplies pour into British ports continuously. Because the RAF held the sky and the Navy held the sea, Great Britain transforms from an isolated, besieged island into the largest, unsinkable springboard in military history, preparing to liberate Europe. The cost of this victory is staggering. Beneath the freezing Atlantic waves lie the rusted, twisted wrecks of 3,500 Allied merchant ships and 175 warships. With them rest 36,000 merchant sailors and thousands of Royal Navy personnel. Dead. Ordinary men who froze or burned to death to keep the island's lifeline open. For the German Kriegsmarine, the ocean floor becomes a sprawling, inescapable graveyard. Out of the 1,156 U-boats built by Germany, 783 are utterly destroyed. The U-boats literally became iron coffins. Of the 40,000 young men who served under Admiral Dönitz, 30,000 never returned home, an apocalyptic casualty rate of 75%. In the sky, the few paid a heavy toll. 544 RAF Fighter Command pilots gave their lives during the Battle of Britain to maintain the impenetrable air shield. Below them, over 40,000 British civilians died in the Blitz, their cities reduced to ash. Yet, their unbreakable psychological endurance ultimately shattered the will of the Luftwaffe. Ultimately, the historian's view reveals that this was not a war won purely by heroism. It was won by the relentless, cold mathematics of Alan Turing's codebreakers, by the visionary radar integration of the Dowding system, and by the unstoppable, overwhelming industrial avalanche of American shipyards and factories. By 1944, Operation Bolero completes the greatest military buildup in history. Over 2 million Allied soldiers are safely ferried across the secured Atlantic Ocean. Great Britain is transformed into a colossal, heavily fortified staging ground. Its airfields are packed edge to edge with bombers, its ports overflowing with thousands of landing craft. On June 6, 1944, Operation Overlord begins. An unstoppable armada of 7,000 vessels crosses the English Channel to smash Hitler's Atlantic Wall in Normandy. This historic liberation of Europe would have been mathematically and physically impossible if Dönitz's U-boats still controlled the oceanic supply lines. And it would have been strategically impossible if the Luftwaffe had successfully established air superiority and destroyed the RAF over the English Channel in 1940. Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt's Grand Alliance survived its absolute darkest tests because the technological shield in the sky and the industrial bridge across the sea held firm. The Battle of Britain and the Battle of the Atlantic remain the two most vital, foundational victories of the Second World War. The island stood, and the world was saved. Prime Minister Winston Churchill bluntly described the Arctic convoys as the worst journey in the world. It was a suicide mission through the most unforgiving ocean environment on Earth. By late 1941, the Soviet Union is hemorrhaging troops against Hitler's invasion. To keep the Red Army fighting, the Allies must deliver millions of tons of crucial Lend-Lease military hardware. The treacherous supply line runs from Britain and Iceland, sailing dangerously close to German-occupied Norway, navigating through the freezing Arctic Circle, before finally arriving at the Soviet port of Murmansk. Before engaging a single German, sailors must battle nature itself. Temperatures plummet to minus 30 degrees Celsius. Monstrous rogue waves batter the convoys, while creeping pack ice threatens to crush hulls. Freezing sea spray coats the merchant vessels in thick layers of solid ice. Exhausted crews must constantly chip away this heavy ice with pickaxes, or the top-heavy ship will capsize. Survival in the Arctic water is mathematically terrifying. If a sailor falls overboard or a ship is torpedoed, the freezing temperatures guarantee death by hypothermia in less than 3 minutes. Summer brings a different nightmare, the phenomenon of the midnight sun. With 24 hours of continuous daylight above the Arctic Circle, the slow-moving convoys have absolutely nowhere to hide. Operating from airfields in occupied Norway, German Junkers Ju-88 dive bombers launch relentless strikes. The continuous daylight allows the Luftwaffe to attack the convoys round the clock without mercy. Beneath the ice floes, Donitz's U-boats lay deadly ambushes. The acoustic conditions of the Arctic water frequently distort British sonar, making submarine detection incredibly difficult for the freezing escort destroyers. But the ultimate terror is the German battleship Tirpitz. Lurking in the Norwegian fjords, this 42,000-ton behemoth forces the entire British Royal Navy to keep massive fleets constantly on high alert. The threat peaks in July 1942 with convoy PQ-17. Believing the Tirpitz is attacking, the British Admiralty panics and orders the 35 merchant ships to scatter and proceed alone. It is an unmitigated massacre. Without escort protection, Luftwaffe bombers and U-boats hunt down the isolated ships. 24 vessels are systematically destroyed, losing 144,000 tons of vital military cargo. Despite the horrific losses, the shipments forced their way through. Upon reaching Murmansk, the frozen cargo of Sherman tanks and Hawker Hurricanes is immediately loaded onto Soviet trains heading eastward. Over 4 years, 78 Arctic convoys deliver 4 million tons of supplies to the Soviet Union. The cost is devastating. 104 Allied ships sunk and over 3,000 merchant seamen killed. This brutal, freezing supply line fundamentally altered the war. Without this constant stream of Allied steel, the Soviet Union's capacity to halt the Nazi war machine would have severely collapsed. While Alan Turing is the celebrated genius, Bletchley Park is actually a massive intelligence factory. By 1944, nearly 10,000 personnel, predominantly brilliant women from the Wrens, work in total secrecy. Their hardest target is the Kriegsmarine Enigma. Unlike the Luftwaffe, Admiral Dönitz uses stricter protocols, double encryptions, and specialized rotors, making the naval codes infinitely harder to crack. To shortcut the 159 quintillion possibilities, Turing exploits human error. German operators routinely send daily weather reports. By guessing the encrypted word wetter, weather, Turing creates a starting point, known as a crib. Using these cribs, Turing programs the massive bomb machines. The machine uses electrical logic to rapidly eliminate millions of impossible settings, searching only for the correct one. When activated, the bomb's drums spin at furious speeds. It sounds like 1,000 knitting needles. It represents the physical embodiment of mechanized thought. But mathematics alone wasn't enough. They needed the physical codebooks. In May 1941, the Royal Navy destroyer HMS Bulldog cripples the German submarine U-110 and forces it to the surface. Before the German captain can scuttle the ship, a British boarding party scrambles inside. They capture an intact Enigma machine and, crucially, the highly classified Kurzsignale codebooks. Armed with these physical cheat sheets, Turing's bombs shatter the Kriegsmarine's veil. German operational orders, U-boat locations, and ambush plans are suddenly printed in plain, readable English. But cracking Enigma creates a terrible moral dilemma for the Allies. If you save every single convoy using ultra-intelligence, Dönitz will instantly realize his unbreakable code has been broken. To protect the ultimate secret that could win the entire war, Churchill and the Admiralty must make a cold, statistical sacrifice. They must deliberately let certain ships die. British intelligence tracks wolf packs converging on a convoy. They know exactly when and where the torpedoes will strike. Yet, they issue no warning. The men burn, so the secret lives. Despite this grim reality, the system expands. Turing's bomb design is mass-produced in America. By 1944, over 200 bombs are running continuously, deciphering 3,000 German messages every single day. Yet, when the war ends, Churchill orders the entire operation erased. To maintain geopolitical advantage, the bombs are physically smashed to pieces. Turing's monumental achievement is buried in classified vaults for decades. Historians now estimate that Bletchley Park's breaking of the Enigma code shortened the Second World War by 2 to 4 years, preventing the Axis powers from developing advanced weapons. And in doing so, the eccentric mathematician Alan Turing and his team of codebreakers ultimately saved an estimated 14 million lives. Behind the tactics and intelligence lies a brutal engineering war. To defend the island, the RAF relies on an aerodynamic masterpiece designed by Reginald Mitchell, the Supermarine Spitfire. Its most distinctive feature is the elliptical wing. This incredibly complex shape minimizes drag and creates a highly efficient lift distribution, granting the Spitfire a remarkably tight turning radius. Powering this elegant frame is the legendary Rolls-Royce Merlin V12 engine. Capable of generating over 1,000 horsepower, it provides the ferocious speed needed to intercept German bombers. Its mortal enemy is Willy Messerschmitt's Bf-109. Unlike the curved Spitfire, the German fighter favors straight lines, brutal efficiency, and mass production. It is a lethal, angular predator. The Bf-109 possesses one massive technological advantage. The Daimler-Benz DB601 engine utilizes direct fuel injection, whereas the British Merlin engine relies on an older gravity-fed carburetor. In combat, this detail is a matter of life and death.
30,000 feet.
When a German pilot needs to escape, he simply pushes his stick forward, going into a steep -G dive. If a British pilot tries to follow, the negative gravity forces fuel to flood the carburetor. The Spitfire engine violently sputters, chokes, and stalls, spewing black smoke and losing the target. The solution comes from brilliant Royal Aircraft Establishment engineer Beatrice Schilling. She designs a deceptively simple brass thimble with a hole in the middle, restricting the fuel flow under negative gravity. Affectionately dubbed Miss Schilling's orifice, this tiny metal ring cures the engine stall. Installed across the RAF, it allows British pilots to safely pursue their prey into steep dives. While the Spitfire is the glamorous sports car, the workhorse of the RAF is the Hawker Hurricane. Outnumbering Spitfires 2 to 1, its design is older, utilizing a steel tube structure covered in fabric. This antiquated design holds a secret advantage. High explosive cannon shells fired by German fighters are designed to detonate against solid metal. When they hit the Hurricane's fabric, they often pass right through without exploding. Furthermore, a damaged Hurricane can be repaired overnight by ordinary mechanics using little more than fresh canvas and structural glue. It returns to the sky the very next morning. The armament philosophies also collide. The Bf-109 packs a devastating 20mm explosive cannon, firing directly through the propeller hub, requiring deadly accuracy from the German pilot. Conversely, British fighters are armed with 8 Browning 303 machine guns spread across the wings. They are harmonized to converge at exactly 250 yards, creating an inescapable buzzsaw of bullets. In the end, neither fighter was truly superior. The Spitfire and the Bf-109 were perfectly matched apex predators. The outcome of the battle rested entirely on the skill and exhaustion of the pilots themselves. While the machines were marvels of engineering, the human experience inside a German U-boat was a descent into psychological and physical hell. 50 men were crammed into a claustrophobic steel pressure hull just 67 meters long. There was absolutely no privacy, no sunlight, and barely enough room to stand upright. Space was so limited that sailors practiced warm bunking. As soon as one man finished his shift and left his bunk, another immediately crawled into the unwashed, still warm sheets. Fresh food spoiled within days in the damp environment. Loaves of bread turned completely white and green with mold. Sausages and hams were hung directly over the crew's heads like decorations. The stench was unimaginable. A sickening cocktail of diesel fumes, rotting food,
sweat,
unwashed bodies,
mold,
and overflowing bilges permeated every inch of the submarine. Because the second toilet was used as an extra food pantry, 50 men shared a single functioning bathroom. Operating it required a complex sequence of hand-cranked pressure valves to flush it into the ocean. But the physical disgust paled in comparison to the psychological terror. When a British destroyer located them, the U-boat had to dive deep, shut down the engines, and maintain absolute silence. In the pitch black, the crew listened in terrified silence. Suddenly, the deadly acoustic ping of British ASDIC sonar penetrated the steel hull, echoing through the compartment like the bell of doom. Then came the depth charges. Sinking barrels filled with high explosives were dropped from destroyers above, drifting slowly downward toward the submarine hiding in the depths. When they detonated, the shock waves violently threw the men across the metal grates. As the submarine was pushed past its crush depth, metal rivets snapped off the hull and shot across the cabin like lethal bullets. To evade the hunters, U-boats sometimes stayed completely submerged for up to 2 days. Oxygen depleted rapidly, and toxic carbon dioxide slowly suffocated the exhausted crew. Men lay perfectly still in the dark, filtering the CO2. The unimaginable psychological strain broke many minds. Claustrophobia and violent panic attacks in the dark were a terrifying reality. Being trapped in a sinking iron tube is humanity's most primal fear. But if they survived and surfaced for air, they immediately became targets for Allied patrol bombers. The German submariners were hunted without mercy from above and below. Of the 40,000 elite volunteers who served in the U-boat fleet, an astonishing 30,000 never returned. It remains the highest casualty rate of any military branch in the war. A horrific sacrifice, swallowed quietly by the dark, freezing, and indifferent waters of the Atlantic Ocean. While battles are fought with blood and courage, global wars are ultimately decided by steel, oil, and GDP. By 1943, the conflict transforms into a brutal, unforgiving war of mass production. President Franklin D. Roosevelt promised that America would become the arsenal of democracy. In response, the entire United States economy shifts gears, converting civilian factories into unstoppable military assembly lines. At the massive Willow Run plant in Michigan, Ford applies automobile mass production techniques to aviation. At its peak, this single factory produces one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. In the East, the Soviet Union performs an unimaginable logistical miracle. As the Germans advance, Stalin orders 1,500 entire factories dismantled, loaded onto trains, and moved safely behind the Ural Mountains, reassembled in freezing conditions, sometimes without a roof over their heads. Soviet women, children, and elderly men work grueling 14-hour shifts to rapidly churn out the rugged T-34 tanks. German engineering takes the exact opposite approach. Tanks like the Tiger are over-engineered, handcrafted masterpieces. They are terrifying in combat, but terribly complex to fix and incredibly slow to manufacture. This perfectionism proves fatal. During the war, Germany builds roughly 49,000 tanks. In stark contrast, the United States churns out 86,000, while the Soviet Union unleashes over 100,000. But building machines is useless without the lifeblood of modern war: oil. Germany has virtually no domestic oil reserves, desperately relying on the Ploiești oil fields in Allied Romania. In stark contrast, the United States is drowning in oil. During the conflict, the U.S. alone produces an astonishing 60% of the world's crude oil, powering the entire Allied war machine. To survive, German scientists perform chemical alchemy. Massive industrial plants at Leuna convert solid coal into synthetic aviation fuel. But these sprawling complexes are impossible to hide. This makes them prime targets. The U.S. 8th Air Force unleashes a ruthless strategic bombing campaign, specifically targeting synthetic oil plants and the rail networks needed to transport raw materials. German Minister of Armaments Albert Speer fights a losing battle. To survive the relentless bombing, he is forced to decentralize German production, hiding small workshops in forests and caves. This desperation leads to ultimate cruelty. In horrific underground facilities like Mittelwerk, the Nazis use concentration camp slave labor to assemble V-2 rockets. More prisoners die building the weapon than the weapon kills in combat. By 1944, the combined GDP of the Allied nations outstrips the Axis powers by a massive 3-to-1 ratio. The war is no longer a strategic contest, it is a mathematical execution. For Hitler's war machine, the tanks sit empty, the planes are grounded without fuel, and the factories lie in ruins. The industrial hourglass of the Third Reich simply runs out of sand. While the West fought on the oceans, Hitler turned his gaze east. On June 22, 1941, he tears up the Non-Aggression Pact and launches Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in human history. The scale is mathematically staggering.
3,000 tanks.
3 million Axis soldiers, over 3,000 tanks, and 7,000 artillery pieces surge across a front line stretching nearly 3,000 kilometers. Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin is completely paralyzed by the betrayal. Refusing to believe intelligence reports, his Red Army is caught entirely off guard. Entire Soviet divisions are encircled and annihilated in weeks. The initial German Blitzkrieg is overwhelmingly successful. By December 1941, the Wehrmacht captures over 3 million Soviet prisoners of war. Most will be deliberately starved to death. But as German panzers reach the outskirts of Moscow, they meet an undefeated enemy, General Winter. Temperatures plummet to -40 degrees. The German war machine physically freezes solid. Hubris is fatal. Hitler expected to win before autumn. Millions of German troops are trapped in the snow, wearing thin summer uniforms. Weapons jam, engines crack, and men freeze to death. Just as the Germans halt, Stalin unleashes his hidden reserve. Battle-hardened Siberian troops perfectly equipped for extreme winter combat. Supported by winterized T-34 tanks, they push the freezing invaders back. Summer 1942. Desperate for oil, Hitler redirects his armies south toward the Caucasus. But standing in his way on the Volga River is a city bearing his ultimate enemy's name, Stalingrad. What follows is the bloodiest single battle in history. The Luftwaffe bombs the city into rubble, unintentionally creating the perfect defensive fortress. The Germans call this urban nightmare Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. While the German Sixth Army bleeds for every street, Soviet General Georgy Zhukov executes a brilliant masterstroke. Operation Uranus. He secretly amasses 1 million fresh troops outside the city. The pincers slam shut. 300,000 German soldiers are instantly trapped. Starving, freezing, and out of ammunition, Field Marshal Paulus disobeys Hitler's order to fight to the death and surrenders. Stalingrad is the undeniable turning point of World War II. The myth of German invincibility is shattered permanently. From this moment on, the Wehrmacht is in a state of continuous retreat. In summer 1943, Hitler attempts one last desperate offensive to regain the initiative. Operation Citadel. The target is a massive Soviet salient jutting into the German lines at Kursk. What follows is the largest tank battle in human history. Over 6,000 armored vehicles clash in a blazing inferno. German Tigers and Panthers engage swarms of Soviet T-34s at point-blank range. The Soviet defense holds, and their counterattack shatters the German armored reserves. After Kursk, Hitler's armies will never mount a major strategic offensive in the east again. The road to Berlin is open. While the European continent burns, a new superpower rises in the east. Seeking absolute control over Asian resources, the Japanese Empire expands aggressively across the Pacific. On December 7, 1941, Japan executes a devastating surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. 8 American battleships are crippled or destroyed in just hours. Spearheading this blitzkrieg is the Mitsubishi A6M-0. Stripped of armor to maximize range and agility, it completely outclasses the heavier, obsolete American fighters in the early war. The architect of the attack, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, harbored no illusions about American industrial might. He allegedly feared that Japan had simply awakened a sleeping giant. Pearl Harbor fundamentally changes naval warfare forever. The era of the battleship is dead. The aircraft carrier is the new supreme weapon, fighting over the horizon where opposing ships never even see each other. Like in the Atlantic, intelligence is the ultimate weapon. In a windowless basement in Hawaii known as Station Hypo, eccentric codebreaker Joe Rochefort and his team crack the Japanese JN-25 naval code. Yamamoto plans to ambush the remaining U.S. carriers at an island codenamed AF. Suspecting AF is Midway, Rochefort sends a fake, uncoded message. Midway is short of water. The Japanese intercept the bait. Knowing their exact target and timetable, Admiral Chester Nimitz positions 3 U.S. aircraft carriers northeast of Midway. The ambushers are about to be ambushed. The battle begins disastrously. Uncoordinated American torpedo bombers fly in low and slow. They are mercilessly slaughtered by Japanese Zero fighters and anti-aircraft fire without scoring a single hit. But this sacrifice pulls the Japanese fighter cover down to the deck. High above, hidden in the clouds, U.S. Dauntless dive bombers arrive at the exact moment the Japanese carriers are vulnerable, rearming their planes. In 5 fatal minutes, the course of the war changes. Bombs strike decks packed with aviation fuel and armaments. The pride of the Japanese fleet, the Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, are reduced to burning pyres. Japan loses 4 irreplaceable aircraft carriers and their most experienced elite naval aviators. The United States loses only 1, the USS Yorktown. The imperial offensive is permanently broken. With naval supremacy secured, General MacArthur and Admiral Nimitz execute the island-hopping campaign. Bypassing heavily fortified Japanese strongholds, they conquer only strategically vital islands to build airstrips. But on the ground, the reality is a nightmare of disease, mud, and fanatical resistance. In places like Guadalcanal and Tarawa, U.S. Marines fight horrific close-quarters jungle warfare. Step by bloody step, the stepping stones are captured. By 1945, the ring closes. Giant B-29 superfortresses are now perfectly in range to rain unprecedented fire down upon the Japanese home islands. While millions bled on the battlefields, a silent, terrifying race was happening in the realm of theoretical physics. The discovery of nuclear fission in Germany terrified the scientific world. Fearing that Hitler might develop an atomic weapon first, Albert Einstein famously wrote to President Roosevelt, urging the United States to initiate its own nuclear program immediately. What followed was the most expensive and secretive scientific endeavor in history. Entire hidden cities, like Los Alamos in the New Mexico desert, were built from scratch to house over 130,000 workers. Leading this army of brilliant minds was the charismatic and deeply complex physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer. His task was to weaponize the atom before the Axis powers could. On July 16, 1945, at the Jornada del Muerto desert, the device, simply known as the Gadget, was hoisted atop a 100-foot steel tower for the Trinity test. At 5:29 a.m., humanity unleashed the power of the stars. A blinding flash of light vaporized the steel tower instantly, unleashing a shockwave with the force of 21,000 tons of TNT. Witnessing the apocalyptic mushroom cloud rise into the stratosphere, Oppenheimer recalled a line from Hindu scripture, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The weapon was ready, but the justification lay in the Pacific. The recent battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa had cost tens of thousands of American lives against a fanatical Japanese defense that refused to surrender. Military planners estimated that a full mainland invasion, Operation Downfall, would cost 1 million Allied casualties. Faced with this math, President Harry S. Truman makes the grim decision to use the bomb. August 1945, Tinian Island. A specially modified B-29 superfortress named the Enola Gay is carefully loaded with a 9,700-pound uranium bomb, codenamed Little Boy. On the morning of August 6, the bomber flies unopposed over the vibrant industrial city of Hiroshima. The bombardier centers his crosshairs exactly on the distinctive T-shaped Ioi Bridge. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb detonates 1,900 feet above the city. In a fraction of a millisecond, the core temperature exceeds that of the sun. Over 70,000 men, women, and children are vaporized instantly. Still, the Japanese military hardliners refuse to capitulate. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second, even more powerful plutonium bomb, codenamed Fat Man, is dropped on the city of Nagasaki. Faced with absolute, unimaginable destruction, Emperor Hirohito takes the unprecedented step of addressing the Japanese people via radio. He declares that they must bear the unbearable. Japan surrenders. On September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, the formal surrender documents are signed. The deadliest conflict in human history is finally over. The world is forever changed. May 1945. The ashes of the Third Reich are still smoldering. But in the ruins of Berlin, the grand alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union immediately shatters. As Allied forces pushed into Germany, they uncovered Hitler's secret arsenals. They found terrifying Wunderwaffe, wonder weapons, including the Me-262 jet fighter and the devastating V-2 ballistic missile. Both superpowers realize a chilling truth. Whoever controls this advanced Nazi technology will dominate the next global conflict. A frantic, ruthless race begins to loot Germany's scientific minds. The United States launches a highly classified intelligence program, Operation Paperclip. The mission is to identify, capture, and recruit top German scientists before the Soviets can reach them. The grand prize is Wernher von Braun, the brilliant aerospace engineer who invented the V-2 rocket. He is a generational genius, but he carries a dark, unforgivable past. Von Braun was a member of the SS. His V-2 rockets were built using brutal slave labor from concentration camps, resulting in thousands of horrific deaths underground. Faced with a moral dilemma, the U.S. military chooses pragmatism over justice. Intelligence officers systematically whitewash the files of von Braun and his team, erasing their Nazi affiliations. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union launches Operation Osavyakim. At gunpoint in the dead of night, the NKVD kidnaps over 2,000 German technicians and their families, shipping them to Russia. Before the borders officially close, American and Soviet troops frantically scramble to loot the Mittelwerk underground factory, loading trains with V-2 rocket parts to ship back home. The technological spoils are immense. Captured German swept-wing designs and jet engines directly accelerate the development of iconic Cold War fighters like the Soviet MiG-15 and the American F-86. The geopolitical map is redrawn. Former Prime Minister Winston Churchill declares that an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent, dividing Europe into democratic West and communist East. Only two global superpowers remain standing. The United States holds a monopoly on the atomic bomb and vast economic wealth, while the Soviet Union commands the largest land army on Earth. The Grand Alliance that defeated Adolf Hitler dissolves overnight into bitter paranoia and espionage. The friends of yesterday are now locked in an existential ideological standoff. The looted V2 technology becomes the foundation for the ultimate frontier. Von Braun's military designs will eventually evolve into the monumental Saturn V, taking humanity to the moon. But the true legacy of World War II is the dawn of the atomic age. The conflict ends not with lasting peace, but with the terrifying ticking countdown of the doomsday clock. November 1945. Amidst a totally destroyed Germany, one building in Nuremberg remains miraculously intact: the Palace of Justice. Here, the victorious Allies prepare an unprecedented legal reckoning. For the first time in history, an international military tribunal is established. Judges from the United States, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and France sit together to prosecute state leaders. In the dock sits the highest-ranking surviving Nazi, Hermann Göring. Stripped of his ridiculous medals and significantly thinner, he remains arrogantly defiant, wearing headphones to hear the translated charges. But the prosecutors don't rely on witness testimony alone. They use the Nazis' own meticulous bureaucratic records. The trial introduces an entirely new legal concept: crimes against humanity. 12 high-ranking Nazis, including Göring, are sentenced to hang. But hours before his execution, Göring cheats the hangman, biting down on a smuggled potassium cyanide glass capsule. While the top leaders face justice, thousands of mid-level SS officers simply vanished. They escaped Europe through clandestine smuggling networks dubbed the Rat Lines, primarily ending up in Argentina. To cross borders, war criminals like Adolf Eichmann and Joseph Mengele obtained Red Cross humanitarian passports under false aliases, often facilitated by sympathetic figures within the Vatican. But justice has a long memory. In 1960, agents of the Israeli intelligence agency, Mossad, tracked down Eichmann in Buenos Aires, physically kidnapping him off the street to stand trial. Eichmann's trial in Jerusalem was broadcast globally. Sitting inside a bulletproof glass booth, the world saw not a terrifying monster, but a remarkably ordinary, pathetic bureaucrat who merely followed orders. This creates the ultimate moral paradox of the post-war era. While politicians were hanged at Nuremberg for war crimes, scientists guilty of using slave labor were given American citizenship and medals. Beyond the hunt for Nazis, the war triggered an unstoppable global chain reaction. The European empires that won the war were entirely bankrupt. The age of imperialism was functionally dead. Britain had survived, but at the cost of its global supremacy. Massively indebted to the United States through Lend-Lease, the financial center of the world permanently shifted from London to New York. Watching the seemingly invincible European colonizers be defeated early in the war sparked a profound psychological awakening. From India to Vietnam, fierce independence movements erupted to throw off the chains of imperialism. To prevent a third and inherently nuclear world war, the failed League of Nations was buried forever. In its place, the United Nations was established to forge a new international rule of law. World War II remains the absolute defining event of the 20th century. A catastrophe born of tyranny, won by industrial logic and ended by mathematics, permanently reshaping the world we live in today. Historians constantly debate the great what-ifs of the war. What if Hitler had ignored the RAF and launched Operation Sea Lion anyway? The mathematical reality is brutal. Even without air superiority, the British Royal Navy possessed a massive surface fleet. German river barges, totally unsuited for the ocean, would have been effortlessly rammed and massacred in the Channel. What if the German army had captured Moscow in 1941? While it would have been a catastrophic political blow, historians argue it would not have defeated the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union possessed infinite strategic depth. Stalin and his government would have simply retreated behind the Ural Mountains, where their relocated factories continued churning out thousands of tanks. The most terrifying what-if is the German atomic bomb program, the Uran project. What if Hitler possessed nuclear weapons? Thankfully, the Nazis fundamentally misunderstood the required scale. Famed physicist Werner Heisenberg led a severely underfunded, fragmented team. Hitler considered nuclear physics Jewish science and prioritized practical weapons like rockets and jet planes instead. The comparison is absurd. The American Manhattan Project employed 130,000 people and cost $2 billion. The German project employed roughly 100 scientists with a budget of $2 million. What if the United States hadn't dropped the bombs on Japan? Operation Downfall, the planned amphibious invasion of the Japanese mainland, would have been an unprecedented bloodbath. Military projections estimated up to 1 million Allied casualties. Worse, the Japanese government had mobilized civilians with bamboo spears. Estimates for Japanese deaths ranged from 5 to 10 million. In anticipation of this slaughter, the U.S. military manufactured 500,000 Purple Heart medals for the wounded. They produced so many that every single American casualty since 1945 has received one from that exact stockpile. Even without Operation Downfall, World War II remains the deadliest cataclysm in human history. The true final cost of the war defies human comprehension. The burden of death was brutally asymmetrical.
China, 20 million.
The Soviet Union
Germany,
suffered
Japan,
an unimaginable
US, and Britain.
27 million fatalities. China lost roughly 20 million. Together, they bore over half of the global bloodshed. But the most
Military,
haunting statistic
33%.
is who died. Unlike previous
Civilians,
conflicts fought in muddy
67%.
trenches, World War II was a war on cities. Almost 2/3 of all fatalities were unarmed civilians. 75 million lives extinguished. It is a number so vast it loses all meaning. But beneath the statistics, the strategy, and the steel, each number was a universe lost. As philosopher George Santayana warned, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. May we never forget. Beyond the generals and the mechanized slaughter, the true backbone of the war effort remained largely invisible. The conflict was sustained by the sheer willpower of the home front. With millions of men mobilized for combat, women stepped into the factories. Icons like Rosie the Riveter symbolized the millions of female workers who built the arsenal of democracy. In the Soviet Union, women flew combat missions. The all-female 588th Night Bomber Regiment flew obsolete canvas biplanes. By idling their engines and gliding silently, they terrified the Germans, earning the nickname Night Witches. Behind enemy lines, Churchill ordered the Special Operations Executive to set Europe ablaze. Among the most lethal was Virginia Hall, an American spy operating in France with a wooden leg. Considered by the Gestapo to be the most dangerous Allied spy, she organized resistance networks that systematically dynamited train lines and ambushed German convoys, crippling Nazi logistics. This covert warfare ignited civilian uprisings. In 1944, the Polish Home Army launched the Warsaw Uprising. For 63 days, poorly armed civilians fought house to house against heavily armored SS units. In Britain, MI5 eliminated German espionage through the double cross system. Every single German spy captured in the UK was either executed or forced to become a double agent for the Allies. This mastery of deception peaked with Operation Mincemeat. British intelligence dressed a homeless man's corpse as a Royal Marine officer, chained a briefcase of fake invasion plans to his wrist, and dropped him off the coast of Spain. Hitler completely swallowed the bait. Believing the fake documents, he relocated entire panzer divisions away from Sicily, the actual Allied target, to defend Greece and Sardinia. Tens of thousands of Allied lives were saved by a corpse. Even inside the heart of the Third Reich, conscience survived. A group of German university students formed the White Rose, secretly distributing anti-Nazi leaflets, urging Germans to passively resist the murderous regime. But resistance in a totalitarian state is almost always fatal. The Gestapo tracked them down. The core members, including 21-year-old Sophie Scholl, were interrogated, subjected to a show trial, and executed by guillotine. The most successful resistance in Europe was waged in the rugged mountains of Yugoslavia. Led by Josip Broz Tito, the partisans tied down dozens of German divisions that were desperately needed elsewhere. When D-Day finally arrived, the Shadow War paid off spectacularly. The French resistance paralyzed the German response by severing nearly every major telephone line and railway track leading to Normandy. Without these unsung mechanics, decoders, and martyrs, the mechanized armies would have ground to a halt. The victory belonged just as much to the millions who fought without a uniform. Most of their deeds were highly classified, locked away in government vaults for decades. They fought in the shadows, ensuring the world could finally return to the light. In 1945, Europe experienced Stunde Null, Hour Zero. The continent was an apocalyptic wasteland. Major cities were reduced to rubble, and the economies of both the victors and the vanquished were utterly annihilated. The winter of 1946 was exceptionally brutal. With no coal to heat their ruined homes and agriculture completely destroyed, millions of Europeans faced the very real mathematical threat of mass starvation. Recognizing that extreme poverty breeds totalitarianism, U.S. Secretary of State George C. Marshall proposed a radical, unprecedented geopolitical strategy. The United States would pay to rebuild the continent. Officially named the European Recovery Program, the Marshall Plan was a massive injection of American capital, food, and industrial machinery given directly to European nations. Between 1948 and 1951, the United States transferred over $13 billion in economic aid, equivalent to over $150 billion today. It was an unprecedented act of strategic generosity. Instead of weapons, American Liberty ships now cross the Atlantic heavily loaded with raw materials, wheat to stop the famine, and modern tractors to resurrect European agriculture. The results were miraculous. The rubble was cleared away, bombed-out factories were entirely rebuilt with modern American machinery, and European industrial production rapidly skyrocketed past pre-war levels. The U.S. offered this financial aid to the entire continent, including the Soviet Union. However, Joseph Stalin outright rejected it, viewing the Marshall Plan as an imperialist plot to buy European loyalty. Stalin strictly forbade any of his satellite states from accepting the money. As Western Europe rebuilt and modernized, Eastern Europe was sealed behind the Iron Curtain, economically isolated. This tension triggered the first major crisis of the Cold War. In 1948, Stalin ordered a total blockade of West Berlin, cutting off all roads, rails, and canals to starve the democratic sector into submission. Unwilling to start World War III, the Allies responded with a logistical miracle: the Berlin Airlift. For 11 months, cargo planes landed every 3 minutes, dropping millions of tons of food and coal from the sky. Defeated by logistics, Stalin lifted the blockade. Fueled by Marshall Plan dollars, West Germany experienced the Wirtschaftswunder, an economic miracle. Former tank factories now produced millions of Volkswagen Beetles. To physically protect this new prosperity from the Red Army, the West formalized their military alliance in 1949. NATO was born, creating a nuclear umbrella over Western Europe. In response, the Soviet Union formed the Warsaw Pact. While NATO relied on air power and atomic bombs, the Soviets maintained an overwhelming force of tens of thousands of tanks pointed directly at the Iron Curtain. In less than a decade, the bitterest of enemies became the closest of allies. West Germany stood as the primary democratic shield against Soviet expansion. The world was entirely remade. World War II was the deadliest conflict in human history, but it was also the greatest catalyst for technological acceleration. The crucible of war forged the foundations of the modern world. The British chain-home radar network, originally designed to detect incoming Luftwaffe bombers, was instantly adapted for peace. It became the foundation of modern air traffic control, enabling global commercial aviation. German and British jet engine technologies, built to slaughter each other at 500 miles per hour, were rapidly commercialized. The jet age literally shrank the globe, connecting continents in mere hours. Alan Turing's electromechanical bomb and the British Colossus broke the Enigma code, but they did something far greater. They proved that programmable machines could process logic, birthing the modern computer age. Before 1941, minor infections were often fatal. The war forced the miraculous mass production of penicillin, transforming Alexander Fleming's mold discovery into a universal cure that saved countless millions of lives. Innovations like freeze-dried blood plasma and mobile surgical units vastly increased survival rates. Wounded soldiers who would have died in World War I were routinely saved in World War II. The static trenches of the past were replaced by the combined arms doctrine. The synchronized, lightning-fast integration of infantry, armor, and air power established the blueprint for all modern warfare. Massive armies were no longer the only way to strike. The creation of elite, unconventional units like the British SAS proved that small teams operating in the shadows could inflict devastating strategic damage. But this permanent mobilization birthed a new monster. President Eisenhower later warned of the military-industrial complex, a vast, deeply entrenched system where economic profit relies on the endless production of weapons. Above all, the atomic bomb fundamentally rewrote the rules of survival. The Cold War doctrine of mutually assured destruction guaranteed that any future global war would literally end human civilization. To pull humanity back from the abyss, international law was completely overhauled. The 1949 Geneva Conventions were established, explicitly outlawing the targeting of civilians and the mistreatment of prisoners of war. Simultaneously, the horrific ballistic missiles of the war breached the atmosphere. In 1957, the Soviet satellite Sputnik 1 orbited the Earth, officially launching the space age and altering humanity's destiny. The Second World War was a wound so deep it nearly killed human civilization. The planet survived, but it was forever scarred, stitched back together by the cold logic of deterrence and international law. Everything we consider modern, our commercial flights, our antibiotics, our computers, and our geopolitics, was paid for in blood 80 years ago. History is not just the past, it is the blueprint of our present. For better or for worse, every single one of us living today are the children of 1945. In the victory parades of 1945, the major powers took center stage. But history often forgets that the British Empire was sustained by the largest volunteer army in human history, the British Indian Army. Over 2.5 million Indian troops, fierce Nepalese Gurkhas, and hundreds of thousands of African colonial soldiers bled for the Allied cause, fighting for empires that actively denied them their own independence. When the borders were redrawn, Europe faced the greatest refugee crisis in history. Over 60 million displaced persons wandered the shattered continent, carrying whatever they owned in handcarts, searching for homes that no longer existed. Among them were the Wolfskinder, or wolf children. Thousands of orphaned German and Eastern European children survived by hiding in forests and scavenging in the ruins, entirely abandoned by a broken adult world. For the soldiers who did return home, the war never truly ended. Millions suffered from combat stress reaction, now known as PTSD. They brought the invisible, unhealable horrors of the battlefield back to their families. Even the earth itself remained a weapon. To this day, European farmers encounter the iron harvest. Every year, thousands of tons of unexploded World War II ordnance are dug up, still fully capable of killing decades later. In Asia, the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal attempted to mirror Nuremberg. Top Japanese officials, including Prime Minister Hideki Tojo, were sentenced to death for launching aggressive war and committing horrific atrocities. But justice was highly selective. General Douglas MacArthur secretly granted absolute immunity to the scientists of Unit 731, who conducted horrific, lethal human experiments in exchange for their biological warfare data. For hundreds of thousands of Soviet POWs, liberation was an illusion. Stalin considered anyone who surrendered to be a traitor. Upon returning home, they were immediately thrown into brutal Siberian gulag labor camps. Even in victorious Great Britain, the financial ruin was absolute. Rationing actually became stricter after the war than during it. British citizens continued using ration books for bread and meat until 1954. The conflict also inflicted a devastating, silent wound on the planet. Thousands of sunken warships and oil tankers still lay at the bottom of the world's oceans, silently leaking millions of gallons of toxic oil into the ecosystem today. To satisfy Stalin's territorial demands, entire nations were physically moved. Poland's borders were literally shifted 200 miles to the west, absorbing German land and forcing 12 million ethnic Germans into a brutal, violent exodus. The unimaginable horrors of the Holocaust convinced the international community of the absolute necessity for a Jewish homeland. In 1948, the State of Israel was established, forever altering the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. In the United States, however, the post-war era created the modern American dream. The GI Bill paid for millions of returning veterans to attend college and buy homes, creating the most prosperous middle class in history. We walk on streets built over their rubble, live in countries defined by their borders, and enjoy freedoms bought with their unimaginable sacrifice. The ghosts of the Second World War are still standing right beside us. Today, the beaches of Normandy are quiet. The blood has washed away, and nature has reclaimed the killing fields of Europe and the Pacific. The men and women who fought are fading into history. Soon, there will be no living witnesses left to tell us what happens when humanity goes mad. As their voices vanish, the responsibility falls to us. History is a fragile construct. It only survives if we actively choose to carry its weight. For nearly 80 years, the memory of that slaughter has maintained the long peace, preventing a third world war between superpowers. But memory is incredibly short. Even the geopolitical scars eventually healed. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, finally concluding the Cold War that was birthed directly in the ruins of 1945. When viewed from space, there are no borders. There are no allies or axis. There is only a single, fragile blue dot suspended in the endless dark. The institutions built to protect us, the United Nations, international law, are not unbreakable laws of physics. They are promises we must choose to keep every single day. This film is dedicated to the 75 million souls who were consumed by the fire. To the soldiers, the innocent, and the forgotten. Their sacrifice bought us our present. It bought us our future. The greatest tragedy would be to squander the peace they paid for with everything they had. The Second World War, a warning from the past, a lesson for the future.